Good evening, everyone. Let's start with another poem by Rumi. Seems to be kind of our mascot of this particular program. There are two kinds of intelligence, one acquired as a child in school memorizes facts and concepts from books and what the teacher says, collecting information from the traditional sciences as well as the new sciences. With such intelligence, you rise in the world, you get ranked ahead or behind others in regard to your competence in retaining information. You stroll with this intelligence in and out of the fields of knowledge, always getting more marks on your tablets. There is another kind of tablet, one already completed and preserved inside of you. A spring overflowing its spring box, a freshness in the center of the heart. The other intelligence does not turn yellow or stagnant, it's fluid, and it doesn't move from outside to inside through condense of plumbing learning. The second kind of knowing is a fountainhead from within you moving out. So that's the wonderful poem by Rumi. We're going to talk a little bit about two ways that the brain might be divided. I find it really fascinating that the human brain, so complex, so sublime, so beautiful, and clearly having an objective to keep us all going, can have different parts that are in conflict with each other. It seems like almost a mistake, and yet it is. We will see how those kinds of things are going. Some of the things are related to the fact that it might not have been so much in conflict when we were doing our hunter-gatherer days, but some of them really even must have been problems back then. The first thing I want to talk about is just daydreaming. How many people have done this? I know I have. You're reading a book, you're sitting there reading, and all of a sudden you realize you've like missed a page or two. You were reading it, but nothing was happening. You had to go back and read it. How's that happen? That's happened to me. It happened all the time. Another thing that happens to me very frequently, I've been doing meditation for 32 years, and I've been working with this stuff. I have a practice that I do very frequently where I count my breaths up to 108. 108 is a sacred number, and it has a variety of things importance to me, including it's the number of stitches that are on a baseball, but that's another thing. And even though I am very practiced at this, I would say only about 1 out of every 3 times do I ever make it. I get kind of lost. I'm counting my breath. Oh, I'm counting them in Spanish these days. I get lost at that sort of thing. The other thing, so the thing that really kind of does this is, I want to, yeah, there we go. I want to check one more thing here. All right, back. The default mode network. So really a very peculiar thing occurred in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when people started to do research on the brain with these things, very interesting things called PET scanners. When activity happens, certain positrons, particles are emitted, and also what are called functional MRI scanners. If you've ever, the MRI scanners, they pick up blood flow. So they're trying to look at the brain in real time. And they would take people who were completely quiet, not doing anything, and they expected to find like not much activity going on and yet a ton of activity was going on in this area here called the default mode network. The default mode network has mostly, it seems more here, it's easier to see in a larger model, more in your midline, and it goes all the way front to back. It's involved with things like daydreaming, sometimes planning. Certainly it's involved with memory, and certainly it's involved in your own personal narrative. And this is one of those things that when we talk about how everything that we were talking about in the last session, your mind will make up a story and distract you and create worry and want you to be involved with being fearful and anxious. That's it. The default mode network does that. It does that very frequently. Some of you may be dropping in and out of the default mode network even as I'm speaking. Later, you'll go and talk to your friend. Do you remember when Paul Norton said that? And they'll say, what? What are you talking about? So I understand that. And the most interesting thing, too, that's happened recently is some researchers at Harvard got people to wear pagers. And when the pager went off, they only had to answer one question. Were you daydreaming or not? And they found that people were daydreaming essentially 47% of the time. This is what our lives are about. This is this kind of fluctuation. So without having anything going on, what we do is we dive into our default mode network. Then, depending on whether we naturally get out of it or whether something disturbs our thing that needs our attention, there's two different networks here. We go out. We go into the default mode network. We go out. We keep oscillating roughly 2 to 3 times a minute. So it's interesting when you see this. This is one of those things that goes on. When we are just left to our own devices, we are not paying attention all the time. We are probably in our daydreaming phase very frequently. Now, the difficulties in having the daydreaming phase is that's an area where we have a tremendous amount of self-referential activity. We have a narrative, who we are, what we're doing, what our concerns are. We also have an idea about defending the self. This is where ego kind of comes from, all in this one particular area. And what we really end up doing is spending a lot of time kind of wasted in the kind of selfing thing. A person we talked about last month, Judson Brewer, did a really elegant study where he could have people in real time who or meditators or just novice meditators. And if you were in the default mode network, you'd see red spikes going on the screen. And if you weren't, you'd see blue spikes going on the screen. And he found that meditators could notice when they were in the default mode network or not. They'd be kind of doing their meditation to be nice and blue. And all of a sudden they'd have a thought, I wonder what I'm supposed to be doing. I wonder what the screen's going on. And then it would go into the red. And so we really do know that a couple of things, that meditators were much better about keeping themselves in the blue. In other words, we can't always get ourselves not to be in the default mode network. But what we can do is not give it so much energy. But this is a really common kind of oscillation. It is actually natural for you if you are meditating. This is a really big thing with meditators. Yeah, I can't follow my breath because I'm kind of losing myself. So the default mode network is an area where dreaming occurs. All those little narratives that come up, the front part of that, which is in the frontal lobe, gets disconnected. And that's where dreams kind of get generated from your default mode network. There's really a lot of things going on with all of that. And there used to be thought of, this was the first big network to be discovered. But now there's a whole host of them, and the brain is just loaded with a lot of these networks. Some of them overlap. Saliency network, which is whether we like or dislike something, that's where the insula is involved. There is, if you're just sitting here and you're drifting out of the default mode network, you go to something called the dorsal attention network. But if somebody does something sudden to get you out of the default mode network, you go into the ventral one. Anyway, there's an executive decision when there's tons of these little networks going on. And most of them are kind of not that interesting or important, but being in the default mode network, realizing that we're having a lot of this, I think is. And to realize that's where the selfing is. And that it's very encouraging from Judson Brewer's work that we can drop out of the default mode network when kind of whenever we want to. If we really are practicing very diligently, we can learn to quiet it, because it's screaming at us a lot, especially under those circumstances where it wishes to remain relevant by feeding us things to fear and worry about. There's a lot going on there, and I just wanted to mention it really briefly because I really much more wanted to talk about the other kinds of things going on between right and left brain, which has really been hitting the fan recently, so to speak. But are there any questions about the default mode network and why it's important? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Could you repeat the question? We're going to get your microphone here. How about that? We've become so technologically savvy now. We're tuned in.
So what happens in the brain when one is seriously trying to pay attention, like staring at a candle flame or whatever meditative object you have? What is that about compared to other forms of brain activity?
Yeah, well, certainly when you get out of the default mode network, usually you go into an area called the dorsal attention network, which is this part of your frontal lobe, these areas right behind which are close to the motor things, and that's where you go. If you are staring at a flame or doing something like that, it's almost certain that at some point you fall into the default mode network. If you're a really good meditator and you're concentrating, the energy won't be very high. You'll be there, but it'll be kind of quiet until you get out of that sort of thing again. So it's almost like a pulsation, this oscillation that kind of goes back and forth. Now, if you're looking at your flame or chanting your mantra or whatever, and you're going back and forth before those things, and suddenly there's a loud bang outside your door, that alternates a different network that is called the ventral attention network. Very complicated and still being worked out. But these kind of, where we used to have an idea that, just discrete parts of the, brain were involved. We now know that there are big networks that are involved. So there isn't a quote unquote single area for daydreaming. It's a network. It's this long network called the default mode network. There isn't a single area for attention. We can give you the names of the individual areas, but there's 2 or 3 that are lighting up and they're all connecting with each other. Interestingly, and these connections are usually very, very strong. The interesting part, there is just as I mentioned, these are some of the fastest pathways in these attention networks. There is a particular neuron that are called von Economo neurons, V-O-N Economo neurons. And they actually are the fastest neurons in our bodies, and they connect very quickly. They're very large. They have a lot of myelin, and they have all these kinds of things going on. But anyway, that's another thing. This is all happening so very quickly. I think maybe if I'm back here next year or the year after, I'll have more information about that. But right now, all I can say is the default mode network is something worth working with. I don't know, just like I go to sleep, I don't know when I fall asleep. But when I do fall, but I do know when I wake up. Having been with this particular knowledge about the default mode network, I never know when I disappear into it, but I do know when I get out of it. It's kind of interesting, especially on the cushion. You're sitting there and all of a sudden you're out of it. And you have at least an appreciation that, yes, you drifted. Keep coming back. So, Wade, I think Jonathan had a question there.
For the studies that have been done on meditators and the default mode network, has it been like sitting meditation primarily? It's a two-part question, but first one is, has it primarily been sitting meditation?
They were doing Vipassana meditation for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I assume then, because I'm curious about how the default mode network may or may not be engaged when you're doing more active things, let's say mindful eating, right? Or mindful walking,
yeah,
or, just mindful cleaning, whatever you're trying to do.
That's a wonderful question. I'd like to know the answer to that too. And at least as far as I know, one of the problems with that, of course, is if you're doing mindful walking, well, there's no portable MRI scanner for you to walk around with. So you can't know that. Mindful eating, they could possibly do something along those lines. But actually, when you do motions like chewing, you get a lot of artifact. And so no one really knows with that. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about the concept of to pay attention.
Yeah.
I mean, does that mean we're out of the default mode network, or do we know what it means to pay attention?
Well, we can have the desire to pay attention, and we do, but we often can't stay there. We drift, just like you might have the desire to stay up and watch all of Mrs. Maisel, but it's on at 9 o'clock at night and you fall asleep. So it's kind of the same sort of thing. You certainly it certainly helps to want to pay attention. Sometimes you'll drift into the default mode network anyway.
Oh, and there's the concept of presence. Is that a sort of a continuous paying attention?
Well, you can be somewhat present when you're in the default mode network, but not as well as if you are in the other networks. It's almost like a void rather than a specific feeling. If you're a good practitioner and you're in the default mode network and there's not much energy, it's like kind of absence of thought almost. So, and then when you get out, you kind of see how that is. So it's a very interesting way to kind of notice. And when you do your sitting meditation, just notice that, oh yeah, I drifted back, and see how that is kind of going for you. But the areas, the one thing I say is this is kind of an area that when it was there, it was about planning as a hunter-gatherer for how you were going to scan the horizon and do this and do that, and always looking to protect. So that's why it is still there, and it's still there looking for trouble. And if it doesn't find trouble, it will make it up. So that's where we are with all that. So anyone else? Thanks. So, whoops, I'm going the wrong way, am I? Ta-da. Oh yeah, here, I'm just gonna, so I don't make anything, yes. Anti-correlates with attention networks. I forgot to mention that. You can't be in the default mode network and an attention network at the same time. Actually, this is not true for children. Their separation isn't really complete until adolescence sometimes. But once you're an adult, you can either be in the default network or an attention network, but you can't be in both. So they quote unquote anti-correlate. And again, at rest, there's a big fluctuation. When you're out making kind of decisions, then not necessarily. Yeah, and it's there about 50% of the time, a lot of time. So, all right. Yes, it's quieted in long-term I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, and meditators. Long-term meditators can quiet the default mode network. That's one of our great advantages. It's nice, but it's still going. But you're still going to go into it. So on those days when I really do that 1 out of 3 times, where I do my 108 breaths, there's no question that I went into the default mode network. That's way too long of a time that a person wouldn't go in. Yet I continue to be able to count through it somehow. Mainly because the narrative that kind of would be distracting me has been quieted by the meditation, the years of meditation, that kind of long-term effect. So, whoops, going the wrong. Okay, here we go. Let me see if I can make that smaller over there. All right. There are now 2 great giants of neuroscience that have been talking about the right brain and the left brain. The first one is Ian Mcgilchrist. Ian is spelled I-A-I-N, 2 I's, Mcgilchrist. And he has an interesting history in the fact that he started out as a person who was involved in the humanities. I believe he was a professor or an assistant professor of literature. And he would be really actually annoyed that people would take these beautiful works of literature and poetry and try to kind of dissect them like a frog, really kind of take their little parts apart. And he found that to be really annoying. At any rate, he left the humanities, and as a late attender, he attended medical school, became a psychiatrist. And as he became a psychiatrist, he became very interested in this idea of the left brain and the right brain. He's really a wonderful person to see on a YouTube video. And I would recommend the one that he's done with the people at Plum Village, which is called Understanding Our Mind Retreat. And I believe that's in your handout. But his books are really long. They're really long, and he gives example after example of how the left brain is difficult than the right brain. Suffice it to say, it's all those things in the right brain. It's the left brain is involved with detail and locality. It likes familiar things. It likes things to be very explicit. It likes things in parts. So that's one of the things that he was complaining about when he was a literature professor, is why do people want to take this apart? Why do they want to say this phrase has this particular knowledge and this phrase has this way, and the way they put this punctuation made out of that? And he was seeing that he thought that was, a little bit annoying and maybe perhaps a little bit backwards. It is involved with putting things into categories. It really feels very comfortable if it can say this is this particular type of thing. So it's very comfortable if you say this is a bowl or this is a bell, it's happy with that. But if you say something like, I don't know what it is, the left brain is really uncomfortable with it, and quite frankly, will make something up. It's represented, meaning the right brain has a thing that goes on, and then the left brain kind of modifies it into these categorical things. It's where language is. It also is very self-referential and very much involved with past, present, and future. It's very confident, and it tends to be static. The left brain is often the kind of forceful. When you hear or see people who say about things, say, I don't know, let's talk about something really absurd, the flat earth. I hope nobody's here a member of the Flat Earth Society. I don't want to offend anybody. But the people who kind of really believe that the Earth is flat, that's a left brain thing. They hold on to it. No amount of information will change them. And we have some examples of things that have happened kind of neurologically with people. Let me go through the right brain first, and then we can talk about that. The right brain likes wholeness, loves novelty, actually is very much like wants to always question why and live in mystery. It's more implicit. It's definitely related to body image. Our body image, and not only our body image, but the body image of other people around us, which is how we pick up their emotions, is all processed in the right insula. And that's why we talked about that before, why body practices are compassion practices. They help us contact the context of other people. It's how we recognize people. So when you recognize people, there's an interesting, I'm going to go to an interesting thing that people lose sometimes with right brain injury. It tends to be fresh and unique, tends to have its own context. People talk about the left brain as being language, and left brain does have all the vocabulary. That's true. But such things as humor, irony, metaphor, context, prosody, all of these things are actually in the right brain. The almost musical part of the language, the ups and downs, the differences, that's all in the right brain. If you tell the left brain a joke, it might say something like, I don't get it, or that's funny, and you have to explain it to it. It tends to have more empathy, and it gets into is involved with the idea of theory of mind, which is very much an interesting thing in pediatrics. That's one of those things that we see developing in the maybe from 18 months to 4 years, is this idea that you suddenly have, and I don't know why they call it theory of mind, but it's that other people have their own identities, that they're not just things. So when people have, if people have a 15-month-old and the second child comes, 15-month-old doesn't mind so much, almost looks as the new baby coming in as not another entity. At 2, the second baby comes in, there's all kinds of trouble. If people recognize that in their families. And instead of being confident, it tends to be realistic, pessimistic, maybe even questioning. And it's more involved with how things flow than how they are there. The left brain is involved with certainty and the right brain with mystery. There's a wonderful, wonderful Chinese proverb that goes, to be uncertain is uncomfortable, but to be certain is ridiculous. And this is how we all try to kind of go, this is the right brain. So the left brain may say something that they're absolutely sure of, and this is something that really we think is really true. The sun rises in the east. And the right brain would say something like, well, maybe it does. I mean, what does rising mean? And it's more like the southeast anyway, and kind of get into a lot of that debate about all those little things. At any rate, the main thing before all this happened with Ian Mcgilchrist and Jill Bolte Taylor, there was a neuroscientist back in the 50s and 60s called Michael Gazzaniga. And he was a neuroscientist. He wasn't the surgeons doing the experiment, or the procedures. But some people would have intractable seizures, meaning they could not be controlled with medication, and they were happening very frequently. And they found, lo and behold, that if you cut the area between the connection between the right and left hemisphere, which is called the corpus callosum, you would actually stop their seizures. This was terrific. And when they would talk to these people, they would seem perfectly normal until Michael got to talk to them, and found out through a variety of experiments that there were two people inside. There were two people doing, and even had different types of things. There's all kinds of interesting stories about the left brain and the right brain thing. One of my favorites is one of these people who had a left brain. The left brain takes care of the right side of the body, remember? The right brain takes care of the left side of the body for both movement and for sensation. So in one of his patients, the left brain wanted to read the newspaper. We knew it had to be the left brain because the left brain is the only part that can read, only knows that much language to read. And the right brain wanted to watch television. So he would watch this happen for like 10 minutes. The left brain would bring the newspaper up. The right brain would push it down. The left brain would bring the newspaper up. The right brain would push it down without any real even awareness of all this sort of stuff. Really, really interesting things. And one of the other things that is going on is a lot of these, in Ian McGilchrist's books, he talks a little bit about all these kinds of syndromes. My favorite, there's so many of them, but my favorite is the one called Capgras syndrome. In Capgras syndrome, people feel that the people around them have been replaced by a duplicate. So they're not really that person. There's one story about this woman who was deathly afraid of this person who looked and acted just like her husband, but it wasn't her husband. She knew it was a duplicate. And when he tried to get into the bedroom, she was freaked out and all sorts of things. And of course, shouldn't say of course, but the left brain in all of these syndromes is very sure of itself. It's very certain about these sorts of things. Hemi neglect is another thing that the left brain will do. If your right brain is gone and your left brain is available, say you have a right stroke and your left arm is paralyzed, the left brain will say that's not your arm. That's not my arm. What's that doing? No, I don't know whose arm that is, but that's not my arm. And it all seems very logical to it. So these are exaggerations of things that are probably happening on a regular basis. Ian McGilchrist, and I believe that he is really correct about this, is saying that we're a little bit too left-brained. Think about that for a second. How many times do you hear people touting on social media, in the news, about this, how certain they are about things? Really, really certain. You hear that all the time, right? Including, we actually kowtow to people who are certain. In our political system, we like people who are certain. And there is that kind of feeling that certainty is really important. While the right brain is never certain and is always kind of searching that there might be other things going on. What probably has happened with our left brain is because we've had so many sort of scientific advances. If you want to build an MRI scanner, besides just put your head in one, you've got to be kind of precise. You've got to use that kind of left brain kind of way of being. You can't just be right-brained about it. And we've gone on with the explosion of language as well, that we are a left-brain dominated society. And he feels that we suffer because of that. And it's probably a little bit true. Too much certainty, too many people holding on to viewpoints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a solution for that. I want to also get into, let's see if I have what's my next slide here? This is the thing that is going on with Jill Bolte Taylor. Of all people, Jill Bolte Taylor was, and really is still, a neuroanatomist. She was working at Harvard. She was really hot stuff. At a young age, 37, she had a left-sided brain hemorrhage. She got a complete stroke there. And I'm going to say some things about this that really kind of are important to kind of get in perspective. the idea was that her left brain had sort of disappeared, and she felt this, as she describes it in her book. She has a book called A Stroke of Insight, which was about this. She felt timeless. In other words, your left brain has an idea of past, present, and future, and the right brain doesn't involve itself with that so much. So she had an idea, didn't really concern herself about the future. Even to this day, she feels she's lost a lot of her past memories, but doesn't think that's necessarily a bad thing because she thinks some of them might have been painful. She said that her narrative turned off. That monkey mind that we all had. Well, I would bet you, if you're a neuroanatomist at Harvard, I'll bet you've got a really good monkey mind. I'll bet you there's lots and lots of stuff going on that you're thinking about. Turned off. She felt also the experience she had is some of the things that we talked about the right insula did for proprioception, meaning where we are, is true. But one of the things that the left insula does is it actually determines boundaries of our body. So she felt sort of connected with the universe in that way, like there was no specific separation between her body and the outside world. And she could not speak because the left side is involved with language, but she gradually recovered and mentioned all of this. And of course, she knew that she was, as she started to recover, that was non-functional, but it was a wonderful state for her to be in. Moving ahead, yeah. At the time she had a stroke, 37. 37, yeah. And if you see YouTube, and that was in 1997, so she's probably around 60 now. It's really interesting to see her on videos because it's very clear that she's very animated and very almost, I think there's some long-term effects from the stroke, meaning that the energy she has is really good, but I think it's a little bit almost odd, but really very, very, and she's very smart about these things. So she created the 4 characters, and she gave them a little bit of a, these other kinds of descriptions come from other psychologists to talk about these sort of things, Jung for the most part. So the left brain thinking, higher level on the left brain, is called the persona. The left brain emotional is called the shadow. It has past, present, future stuff in it and a lot of other things. The right brain emotional is called the animar animus, which is the, in Jungian philosophy, is the opposite gender of where you are being kind of connected with you. And the character 4 is the right brain thinking. And she has ideas about all of these things. She's very interesting in the fact that she says, the one thing about, she says her character 2 is still fairly weak. She has no emotional memory of her younger days. She has a little bit of the cognitive stuff. She knows what happened in many cases, but she doesn't ever feel being hurt or being upset. She actually feels that's an advantage. She thinks that, she says, there's no child, there's absolutely, I don't know whether she thought before she had childhood trauma, but she has absolutely no childhood trauma because of that. She is also suggested that you give your name, give your people names, all of your 4 characters. She names her character 1, brain thinking, is Helen, which stands for hell on wheels, because her left brain thinking is the one that's kind of doing all the driving and kind of giving and making, organizing. And this is where you really are the good neuroanatomist. She calls her character 2 Abby, which is something that means abandoned, because she feels that that part of her brain went away. I forget what she calls character 3, but character 4 she calls Queen Toad. So anyway, she suggests you give names to these, And she also suggests that when you actually have a difficulty and you need to make a decision in your life, you should have this thing called a brain huddle, where you get your 4 characters together and ask them opinions and have a vote. She says you really should have a vote. And I guess she didn't explain what happens if the vote is 2 and 2, but that's what's problem if you have an even number of characters here. And she's really very animated, and it's really worth kind of watching. She has, her book is very easy to read as opposed to the Ian Mcgilchrist books. And there's also really a wonderful summary about this. So they both realize that the left brain has been a bit of a bully and is going there. A friend of mine who was having a lot of issues with anger and has done a lot of mindfulness practice to kind of work with that and have gone better, made a really interesting insight that I think applies here. He says, when he was growing up, one of the reasons that he has issues with anger is he saw that among adults, whoever yelled the loudest usually got their way. And I think that's what's happening with the left brain in a society where language is so important, and especially assertive language is so important. What Jill Bowley Taylor would call character 1, our left brain thinking, is yelling the loudest in most of us. And we've missed a lot of those opportunities to get in contact with the others. So I want to do one other thing here. I'm going to get out of this share screen for just a second and get into a different one. So I just want to make a little kind of devil's advocate type of thing here. You may not be able to read this, but I will read it and show you what's going on with this. This is her character 1 and character 2. My point would be that both Ian Mcgilchrist and Jill Bowley Taylor have a real problem with the left brain. So this is how she describes the left brain: constricted, rigid, callous, fear-based, stern, loves conditionally, doubts, bullies, righteous, manipulates, deceives, tried and true, independent, egocentric, selfish, self-absorbed, self-righteous, self-promoting, official, superior, inferior, right, wrong, good, bad, a lot of dichotomies, anger, name-calling, feels guilty, internalizes shame, negative self-judgment, anxious, whines, blames, holds grudges or resentments, no respect for authority. Versus character 3, the right brain emotional, which is expansive, open, experiential, risk-taking, fearless, friendly, kind, enigmatic, lives unconditionally, forgiving, trusts, supports, grateful, playful, joyful, goes with the flow, has, let's see, awe-inspired, curious, creative, collective, sharing, equality, contextual, hopeful. Okay, which side do you think she likes the best? She talks about, quite frankly, she does talk about them as if they are equal things, or that all of her partners are equal, but it's very clear that both she and Ian Mcgilchrist are very much involved with promotion of the right side of the brain. And it's true that it's kind of weak with that. But I think that there's a lot to be said about that kind of thing. I think Ian Mcgilchrist's books, he has one about the matter of things, is a more recent book, and his book called The Master and His Emissary. The idea being that the right brain is the master, and the master is in control and knows most things, but got too much going on with his life. So needed to get an emissary to help him like deal with some of the things in under his reign. So the left brain was the emissary, but the left brain got too important and started doing things on its own without the right brain's kind of consent with that. Anyway, I think his books are very left-brained. they're very verbal, and they're example after example after example after example after example of why the left brain is no good and the right brain is good. So I'm a little question mark about that, and I have this idea, that there it is, there's the good right brain and the really bad left brain, and the bad left brain is putting down the good right brain, and et cetera, et cetera. But there are at least 4 different things that I know of in neuroscience that kind of go against that. The first one is when you have left-sided strokes, when the stroke is out and you're right brain dominant, depression is far more common. People with right brain strokes, the actual left brain, it's very delusional, but it's usually pretty confident and not having much of a mood thing. So there's a lot of bit of that kind of being open is a little bit pessimistic. The amygdala lights up on the left side for happy events, not on the right side. There's something about feeding in that are these good events that turn out to be part of the limbic system, the left limbic system, not the right limbic system. A happy event doesn't pick up on at least the right amygdala, that part of it. If you have, somebody had case reports, they compiled 20 case reports of right parietal lobe, if you remember the right parietal lobe's right about here, of strokes in the right parietal lobe, knocking him out. Those people became more spiritual. So they were left-sided dominant for their parietal lobes, and they became more spiritual and open and kind, and not much different than many of the people we're going to meet tomorrow morning when we talk about transcendence. But the most important one is the kind of frontal lobe activity. So our good friend, Richie Davison, who we talked about before, he has a cadre of super meditators that are Tibetan monks. And the idea is that he's been studying them really well. When he looked at the monks who had long hours of meditation, I think the champion so far is 53,000 hours of meditation. That's a long time. He found that there was a correlation to the number of hours of meditation and how much left frontal lobe activity was. And in the really experienced meditators at rest, it was hugely happening in the left frontal lobe, not the right frontal lobe. That the right frontal lobe was more related to mood disorders and depression. So and it's kind of a bell-shaped curve for the general population. So there might be some inherent thing with this. Some people are inherently in the left frontal lobe. Some people are inherently in the right frontal lobe. But people who are inherently in the right frontal lobe may have more problems with mood disorders, specifically depression. So it's not really clear that the left brain is the big, bad, nasty boogeyman, and that the right brain is this gentle savior of us all. I do, however, believe that there is more to be gained by trying to be more right-brained, because we do have a left brain dominant society. And so we'll talk about that and we'll do a practice. But before I do that, are there any questions at this point or comments? We're getting you, even though you're not the microphone lady anymore, even though you've lost your job, the microphone has found you anyways.
So earlier you talked about, neurons that fire together or wire together, the neural net pathways. So as you start describing the different parts of the brain and I don't know, our ability to choose where we decide to experience life or
Yeah.
express our views.
Mhm.
So is that kind of what you're leading up to, is developing a neural net? I mean, does loving kindness develop the neural net?
Yes, loving kindness probably strengthens those areas in and around the right insula, the right side of the brain. But the idea is that when you have enough neurologic damage, so Thich Nhat Hanh in 2014 had a left-sided stroke. He appeared actually to be fairly happy through most of the rest of his career. It's hard, rest of his life, hard to know, but he never said another word, and that was gone. And no matter how much meditation or anything else we have, although here's a really curious thing. If you're a man and you get a left-sided stroke, your language is gone forever. If you're a woman and you get a left-sided stroke, after several months, in many people, not everybody, the right side of the brain, the mirror image of the right side of the brain that was involved with language, starts taking over. So women who actually get left-sided strokes can get language back. You know, you already live longer, right? You know, you already have all these kind of diseases. We get all these diseases you don't get. You need one more advantage. Okay, there you go. So, I mean, that's a really curious thing. So the other thing I wanted to know about Jill Bolte Taylor, I would love to see her MRI scan. Maybe it is somewhere. Did she lose her default mode network? When she talks about losing the narrative is no longer there. Now, the default mode network, like everything else, is in pairs. There's a right side, there's a left side. And it might be that the left side of the default mode network is the one that has the narrative. I don't know. But I would really be curious. Maybe there was some compression or some difficulties with their default mode network on the right. Very, very interesting how she kind of describes that all. So was she able to go back to work professionally, incredibly? She didn't actually go back to work as a neuroanatomist at Harvard. She's kind of done this particular thing. She's kind of promoted workshops and written books and does that sort of thing. Her YouTube videos are really a lot of fun to really kind of see. Yep. Yeah. Jill Bolte Taylor, and the whole brain, and I can say the whole brain living book is kind of practical in a lot of ways. This idea about, I have a hard time naming my 4 characters. I think I named 3 of them. I haven't figured out what I'm going to call my sort of left brain one, my left brain thinking, but I've got names for the other 3. And the idea of the brain huddle is an interesting idea. It's an interesting thing of noticing that we're not just all one person, that we have all of these different characters and different personalities that surprisingly are in conflict with each other. Isn't that really interesting? And again, in a left brain dominated society, because the left brain is yelling the loudest, it gets its way. Any other comments or questions? Wait, you're getting.
So psychiatric folks who suffer from dissociative disorder might really have 4 people.
Oh, sure.
They may not be dissociating in the sense of the word.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
they might be just pulling out their other 3 people.
Yeah, just like you have 4 people. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But we've always looked at them as
yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I hadn't thought about that particular thing, but you're right. Yeah. Just like we all have 4 people, right? But they see them as really kind of different. And yeah. Anything else here? Yeah.
There's a default network that keeps people from using the microphone.
So the default network is 1, and you said there were quite a few. that have been identified, different networks of.
Yeah,
brain-
different networks,
different
about
parts of-
17 or 18 right now. Yeah.
So that means that different parts of the brain work together to accomplish something?
Yeah, or even against each other and accomplish something. I would even go so far as to say that. So we're talking about how obvious it is that the left brain is shouting louder, and that's why it seems in modern society to be getting its way. I would also say that for people who are extraordinarily anxious, people who have an anxiety disorder, the default mode network is shouting louder than the other parts of the brain that might counteract it, sort of the attention networks. So there's a lot of things going on. These areas of our brain that are ostensibly been created for survival are actually now more a cause of suffering. So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
So is there any part of the brain that is involved in more than one of these networks?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think every part, well, every cortical part of the brain is involved in a network, I think, the outside of the brain. The lower levels like the thalamus and that sort of thing may or may not be involved with that. Yeah. And in reality, they're involved with more than one in a lot of cases. So, yeah, I think it's the executive control network is also involved with parts of the default mode network. They overlap a little bit. There's lots of sharing with that. Yeah. Jonathan, Wade, you're doing a great job.
For the default mode network, in terms of right brain and left brain, is there any disparity in terms of how it's activated, or is it equal?
I don't know. I mean, they're activated at the same time, if that's what you're asking.
Because it is bilateral.
Yeah. But is there, well, like I say, so it would be interesting to note, since Jill Bolte Taylor had a left-sided stroke, almost certainly lost her left default mode network, and she lost her narrative, maybe that's where the narrative comes from. Maybe it doesn't come from both. Maybe it just comes from the left side. Don't know. I think you need to have sort of more information before you can say that, but that's one of those things that kind of it sort of implies. Yeah. And as you can imagine with, all these networks oscillating and changing, well, it's very busy, as we mentioned this morning, very, very busy what's going on. So are there any people in the Zoom space who have a question? If you do, just speak up because I can't see you. All right. Jonathan, you're not in the Zoom space.
We're all one.
Yeah.
What was my question? Oh, so if I remember right, the right brain, you had said body image was one of them.
Yes.
And when you say body image, is that more like I like my body, don't like my body, or is that more embodiment? Or,
Two different things, but they're both there in the right brain.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because that was kind of my second question was around embodiment, and well, that's good enough.
There's an interesting short sutra in which the Buddha says that all of enlightenment is related to mindful awareness of the body. Very interesting. Kind of says that, even though in other places he says other things are involved. So I mean, a couple of things that I know many of you are already involved with, things that are right-brained activities, such as music. Music is a right-brained activity. Left brain doesn't know what to do with music. It just sounds like a bunch of weird noise. Doesn't like it actually very much. People who lose their right brain. I think music just sounds like, grating noise. If you're talking about literature, things that have more of a metaphoric, ironic, or otherwise poetic type of way, like poetry, is more of something that is involved in the right brain. Humor is involved more in the right brain. So one of the things that I love about the Plum Village tradition is people are not afraid to laugh. I go to a lot of Sangha meetings in Milwaukee, and if there have ever been a time where somebody didn't laugh about something during the session, I don't remember it. It happens all the time. And Thich Nhat Hanh actually had a very wonderful, wry sense of humor. He would throw little things into you had to pay attention to the Dharma talk so you'd miss the subtle little joke that he would throw in. So humor is part of that. All those body exercises like yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, Qigong, whatever, very valuable. I think dance is really something which maybe when we talk about the Sufis and their whirling dervishes, it might be that. That might be it. Music, along with body movement, might really be ways to kind of foster the right brain. And these are things that I think are really important. It made me sad, and still does, that when the Milwaukee Public Schools decided that they needed to save money, they cut music and art as if they were unessential, because what we're really trying to do is to give them skills in things like math and science and forget about the other stuff. So that's neither here nor there. If we had time, and I think there's two things about this. Number one, I don't think we have the time for it to do a body scan, but I recommend, and I put it in the handout, how you can bump up my body scan that's on our website. It's a really wonderful way to get involved with just a very, it's about a 40-minute kind of, paying attention to the body and in a sequential way and with gratitude. And so people, you could kind of look that up. It's also really dangerous to do the body scan at 8 o'clock at night because the snoring is amazing. So, really gets to be distracting for people. So we won't do that, but we will do a quick body-centered meditation here. Let me see if there's something else on here. Oh, yeah, these are things just to remind me about the things. Dancing, being out, happy movement, laughter. Yeah, that stimulates your right brain, doesn't it? Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Yesterday you said that if you practice Tai Chi or Qigong or any of these body disciplines, that you will be increasing your compassion.
Yes.
Could you say more about that?
Yes. The area that so how do we know that people are distressed? We know people are distressed mostly by how they look. So how they, people kind of slump like this, they might be depressed. People who are like this might, more open, look like they're happy, facial expressions, those sorts of things. And the same places that tell me that my body's being slumped will tell you that your body's being slumped, and they're both in the right insula. So the right insula will pick up your body sensations. As a matter of fact, people will start mimicking. People who kind of live together will mimic each other's body sensations just because of this. And that increases your empathy with them and your compassion. You're able to really, quote unquote, feel what they feel a little bit more. Your individual ability to notice your body mindfully will allow you to notice other people's bodies mindfully, and in that way, open up to compassion. So The right insula, my favorite thing. So, any other questions or comments? All right. What about you? You look like you're doing well. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. In, out. In, out. In, out. Please, if you can, feel your body, your whole body with the in-breath and your whole body with the out-breath. Breathing in, I am aware of my feet. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my feet. In, aware of feet. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my lower legs. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my lower legs. In, lower legs, out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my knees. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my knees. In, aware of knees, out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my upper legs. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my legs. In, aware of legs. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my hips. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my hips. In, aware of hips. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my back. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my back. In, aware of back. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my abdomen. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my abdomen. In, aware of abdomen. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my chest. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my chest. In, aware of chest. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my lungs. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my lungs. In, aware of lungs. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my heart. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my heart. In, aware of heart. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my arms. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my arms. In, aware of arms. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my neck. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my neck. In, aware of neck. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my mouth. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my mouth and with my mouth. In, aware of mouth, out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my nose. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my nose. In, aware of nose, out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my eyes. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my eyes. In, aware of eyes, out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my ears. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my ears. In, aware of ears, out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware of my blood. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my blood. In, aware of blood, out, smile. Breathing in, I am aware of my beautiful, elegant nervous system. Breathing out, I smile with gratitude to my nervous system. In, aware of nervous system, out, smiling. wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Going a long time. Mary Oliver is probably the second most quoted poet at the Mindfulness Center. So a wonderful kind of idea. Specifically, I like the idea of you only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. So, Dharma doors here. What are the things to do? Right brain activities we talked about, music, dance, humor, and especially body-centered practices. And I would even go so far as to say that during your regular sitting meditation, really get involved with the physicalness of it, feeling the breath, feeling it really in your body, what's going on with that, the rush of air, the movement of the muscles, the opening of the chest, all of that is really, really important. And in addition to promoting the right brain, there's left brain chill outs. One of the things that our wonderful teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, says is we should ask the question frequently, am I sure? Am I sure? And the idea about whenever we feel really certain about something, double check and realize that sometimes it's just your left brain spouting its opinion, and having a more balanced viewpoint might be the way to go. I personally think that the idea of living in mystery is more important than certainty. There are certain things that I once upon a time thought I might, with enough practice, kind of know. And it's not only true that with a certain amount of practice, I don't know them, but I'm much more comfortable, and I really relish the idea that there's a mystery here, that I can live in the mystery. I can be with part of that and be, perfectly wonderful with it. So